The candles flickered, applause filled the room, and cheerful voices rose in unison. "Make a wish, Dad." I smiled, closed my eyes, pretending for just a moment that birthdays still meant warmth. Then, my daughter set a neatly wrapped box in front of me. The whole room leaned in, expecting laughter, maybe a watch, maybe a book. I tore the paper, lifted the lid, and froze. This wasn't a gift, it was a sentence. I forced a smile to hide the tremor inside, but deep down, I knew it had to be done. Sooner or later, the schemes they were hiding would be exposed, and I would be the one to reveal them. Some presents aren't meant to bring joy, but to test the human heart. What do you think this gift was? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to hear the rest of the story. The living room should have smelled like sugar and laughter. Instead, the sweetness of the cake hung heavy in the air, weighed down by something sharper, almost metallic, like disappointment itself. People shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, whispering into their hands, casting quick glances between me and my daughter. Kim broke the silence first. "Dad, don't look at me like that," she said, her voice straining between sweetness and steel. "This isn't cruel, it's practical. You can't keep living alone." I forced another smile, the kind you wear in church when you don't believe the sermon. "Is that what you call it? Practical." Mark jumped in quickly, his hand on Kim's arm as though she might break without reinforcement. "Look, it's not abandonment, it's planning. Sunrise Ridge has 24-hour staff safety rails, monitored care, liability coverage. This protects everyone." The word hung there, liability. Not love, not loyalty. Liability. Around the room, a few relatives nodded. A cousin muttered something about how her mother's fall had cost thousands in ER bills. Another guest, older, said softly, "He's lucky to have children who think ahead." But others looked away, ashamed for me, uncomfortable with the spectacle. A neighbor shook his head, whispering to his wife on his birthday. I looked at Frank, my oldest friend, who sat stiff as a church pew. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing yet. He was waiting, measuring the room, storing words like ammunition. Kim pressed on. "Dad, do you remember last winter when you left the oven on overnight? What if the house had burned down? What if the neighbors had sued me because you owned the property in my name after—" "That never happened," I interrupted. My voice was steady, but the weight of her words pressed against me. The oven was warm, not lit. I checked. She shook her head. Frustration spilling out. "It's only a matter of time. One fall, one accident, and everything could collapse. I can't carry that risk. None of us can." I noticed she didn't say you could collapse. She said everything. Property, assets, insurance. It wasn't me she was protecting. It was herself. Anna, small and quiet beside me, tugged on my sleeve. Her eyes were wide and wet. "Grandpa?" she whispered. "You don't have to go, right?" My chest ached. I smoothed her hair. "We'll see, sweetheart." Frank finally leaned forward, his voice a gravelly thunder. "Kim, you're dressing it up, but I smell what this really is. You're not talking about his safety. You're talking about convenience. You don't want to check on him. You don't want to take calls in the night. You want him tucked away so you can sleep without guilt." The room froze. Someone coughed nervously. Kim's face flushed red, but she kept her composure. "That's not fair. You don't know what it's like worrying every day." I call, he doesn't answer, I panic. I'm exhausted. I'm not the villain for wanting help. Her words had a ring of truth, and that was what made them dangerous. She wasn't completely lying. Exhaustion is real. Burnout is real, but so is betrayal. I looked at her, my only daughter, and wondered when love had started sounding like accounting. Anna climbed into my lap now, ignoring the stares. "He's not a burden," she said loudly. Her small voice cracked, but it carried. "He makes pancakes for me on Saturdays. He tells me stories about Grandma. He makes me laugh." A murmur rose through the room. One guest wiped at her eye. Another frowned at Kim as though seeing her in a harsher light. Kim snapped, her voice sharp. "Anna, this isn't about pancakes. This is about safety." "No," Anna said, stubborn as only a child can be. "This is about family." The word landed with more force than all of Kim's arguments. Family. I kissed the top of Anna's head and let silence take over. Silence is heavier than shouting. It makes people sit with what they've said. Kim tried to rally. "Dad, please. Think about liability. Think about costs. If something happens." "Something already has happened," I said quietly. She blinked. "What?" "This moment," I said. "On my birthday. In front of everyone. That is what has happened." The whispers grew louder, spreading like cracks through plaster. Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe this isn't the right time." But Kim cut him off. "It's exactly the right time. We can't delay. Tomorrow morning at 9, Sunrise Ridge is ready. All you have to do is sign." Frank slammed his palm on the table, rattling the plates. Not tonight, not on his birthday. Have you lost your soul? The room exhaled collectively, some in agreement, some in dismay. Kim's hands shook as she held up the folder. Papers bristled inside like sharp teeth. It's just a signature away. I stared at the folder, at the woman holding it, my daughter, and felt the weight of generations pressing down. Ellen would have baked a cake. Kim had brought a pen. The candles on the cake had long burned down to stubs. Wax pooled on the frosting like scars, untouched, uneaten. No one wanted to slice it now. The party was no longer a celebration but a tribunal, and I was the man on trial. Kim paced behind her chair, clutching the folder as though it were scripture. Dad, you have to face reality. Everyone here knows it. You're 80. You can't drive safely. You forget appointments. Last month you missed your medication twice. Once I corrected softly, and I corrected it myself. That's what you remember, she shot back. What about what you don't remember? You think we'll wait until there's a fire, a fall, or worse. The words stung, not because they were all true, but because they carried a veneer of truth polished into a weapon. Mark took over, smoother, his voice rehearsed. Sunrise Ridge is state-of-the-art, liability coverage, health monitoring, social programs. This is the 21st century, Dad. Families don't have to shoulder everything alone anymore. This isn't cruelty, it's modernization. He might as well have been pitching a product. Frank scoffed. Modernization. Selling your father like a used car. Mark bristled but didn't respond. I looked around the room. Some guests avoided my eyes, too polite to take sides. Others leaned toward Kim, nodding along with her arguments. But there were also those who looked at me with pity, quiet disgust at the spectacle. The divide was drawn across the carpet, invisible but sharp. Kim pressed harder. Dad, if something happens in that old house, the insurance won't cover it. The neighbors could sue me as your next of kin. Do you expect me to lose everything because you insist on pretending you're still 30? I closed my eyes briefly. I never asked you to carry my life like a debt. She faltered for a second, then steadied herself. I'm not your enemy. I'm protecting you. You can't see it now, but you will. You'll thank me someday. Frank barked a bitter laugh. Or he'll haunt you. Take your pick. The room cracked with uneasy laughter, then fell silent again. Anna's small voice pierced the tension. She slid off my lap, planting her feet firmly on the carpet. Grandpa doesn't need to go anywhere. He's fine. He's smart. He teaches me math better than my teacher. He reads books with me. He remembers the stories about Grandma. He remembers everything that matters. Her words were simple, but they landed like arrows. Kim's face softened for a heartbeat, but pride sealed it again. Anna, you don't understand. Someday you will. No, Anna said firmly. Someday you'll understand. Gasps rippled through the room at her defiance. I felt tears sting my eyes, but held them back. My granddaughter, my last ally, had just spoken truth with more courage than the adults around her. The cake sat untouched, candles drooped, and in that silence, I realized the celebration was gone. What remained was a ledger of grievances tallied and waiting for a final sum. Kim placed the folder flat on the table, sliding it toward me like a dealer laying down a hand of cards. Dad, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. All that's missing is your signature. I didn't touch it. My hand stayed folded steady in my lap. You've turned my birthday, I said slowly, into a contract negotiation. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. Not tonight, I said. Not with candles still smoking and a cake no one will eat. My chair scraped as I stood. The sound was louder than any shout. Anna rushed to my side, clinging to my arm. Frank stood too, his presence like a shield. I looked around the room at family, at friends, at neighbors, some guilty, some curious, some angry, and I said the only truth I could offer without igniting the fire that would come later. You've just given me the cruelest birthday gift a father could ever receive. Gasps, whispers, shifting feet. Then I turned and walked away, Anna's small hand in mine, Frank's shadow behind me. I didn't slam the door. I closed it softly, letting the silence finish what words could not. Behind me, the party dissolved into chaos, voices rising, some in defense, some in accusation. But I didn't look back. Sometimes the only way to keep your dignity is to carry it out the door. I used to think birthdays were a kind of mile marker paper, crowns and cheap candles telling you how far you'd come without ever showing you how much road was left. When Ellen was alive, they were checkpoints that felt like home. She'd tape streamers along the doorway and dust the kitchen with powdered sugar, and the house would smell like vanilla and coffee and something close to permission. We met in a hardware store, which is not where most love stories begin, but where ours made the most sense. I was staring at a wall of fasteners, trying to tell a masonry anchor from a drywall lie, when she stepped beside me and said, "You're going to buy the wrong thing." She smelled like buttercream. I bought the right anchors and a dozen cupcakes from the bakery where she worked, and then I bought a ring 2 years later because it felt like the same kind of certainty. Our wedding reception was at the VFW hall, string lights buzzing a rented speaker, coughing up Sinatra between announcements about the meat raffle. We danced until the soles of my shoes surrendered. We said things like, someday, and when the house is paid off, and it sounded like optimism rather than math. I took a job at the machine shop that first winter because it was warm and the foreman didn't care what you said, as long as you could read the torque chart. Bearings whined their warnings. Belts sang when they were about to go. I learned that a lathe has a mood, and you can either fight it or listen to it. I listened. I worked overtime not because I loved it, but because overtime meant mortgage payments that didn't make my stomach clench. Ellen brought boxes of day-olds to the guys on Monday mornings, peace offerings coated in glaze. She'd write my name on a coffee in looping script and kiss my cheek in the parking lot, quick and conspiratorial. She believed in small luxuries and large patience. When I groused about money, she reminded me that most problems get lighter if you carry them together. We bought our house the year interest rates blinked upward, and everybody said we were fools. The place had a roof that flirted with leaking and a furnace that spoke in sighs. We painted rooms with colors that looked brave in the store and reasonable on the wall. I learned how to sweat copper pipe. Ellen learned which neighbors forgave loud music after 10. On the day we moved in, she set a cake on a cardboard box and stuck one candle in the middle for luck. It worked for a while. Kim arrived in late spring, red-faced and righteous. I was terrified of breaking her and simultaneously sure I could rebuild the world with a socket wrench if she asked me to. The first diaper I changed turned into a slapstick routine that made Ellen laugh so hard she cried and then cry so hard she had to sit. We were poor in cash and rich in noise, the best kind of wealth. There's a photograph from Kim's first birthday that has lived on our fridge longer than any magnet she's got frosting in her eyebrows and a fistful of cake. Ellen bent over her with a laugh you can almost hear if you look at it long enough. The table sags because I didn't brace it yet. The curtains are crooked because I hung them too fast. It is imperfect and therefore perfect. When Kim turned 9, Ellen built a carousel cake with fondant horses that pranced in place. We couldn't afford the spinning base they sell to professionals, so I made one from a Lazy Susan and a roller bearing a buddy brought from the shop. The cake rotated like a slow parade, and Kim clapped on every pass like applause could make it go faster. Ellen said that was the lesson of baking and life structure first, then decoration. I started community college twice and finished neither time. The machine shop always needed another pair of hands, and the house always needed another repair. I told myself it was temporary, the way people tell themselves winter is temporary while they scrape ice at 5 in the morning. Instead of credits, I saved for Kim's. When she was 11, I opened a 529 plan and watched the monthly deposit march out of our account like a tiny soldier. On paper, we were always behind. In our kitchen, we were fine. By the time Kim was 16, my back could predict rain better than the forecast. I taught her to parallel park in the church lot on Sundays when the spaces were generous, and she pretended not to listen when I said to turn the wheel before the bumper kisses the curb. She got into a state school with a brochure full of trees and promise. On the night the acceptance letter came, Ellen baked a sheet cake and we ate it, standing up with forks because plates felt too slow for joy. I took pride in the ordinary things, always having jumper cables in the trunk. Knowing which light switch controlled the outlet with the radio, keeping a list of furnace filters in the junk drawer. Ordinary is how you keep your family safe without looking like a hero. Ellen was better at the beautiful things. She wrote notes and hid them in lunch bags. She remembered which neighbors were alone on holidays. She made birthdays feel like declarations instead of reminders. Money was never abundant, but we were careful. I contributed to my 401k, enough to get the match even when it pinched. Once, when tuition and the roof in the car conspired against us, I took a small hardship withdrawal and paid the penalty with the same grim gratitude you have at a dentist who ends the pain by causing another. We joked that someday we'd retire and open a tiny bakery where I'd fix the broken mixer and she'd fix the broken days. Jokes are how you practice wanting something without scaring it away. The year Ellen got sick began like any other tax forms on the table. Salt on the driveway, a list of minor repairs that would, if ignored, become major. She said she was just tired. Then tired became winded. Winded became a chair pulled out of the way of the oven because standing was a negotiation. Doctors said words that sounded like brands until one didn't, and suddenly our calendar had more appointments than birthdays. We learned hospital waiting rooms that smelled like coffee, trying to hide bleach. We learned which nurses could find a vein on the first try and which ones apologized before they missed. I learned to keep a bag in the trunk with a sweater for the air conditioning that worked too well, and a book I never read because I couldn't hold a plot and a fear at the same time. Insurance covered some things spectacularly and ignored others with bureaucratic grace. We fought politely and then less politely. The social worker with the calmest voice suggested palliative care, then hospice. A nurse named Irene came to our house and showed me how to manage pills that came in schedules that looked like train timetables. She taught me how to lift without breaking either of us. She taught me what it means to sit through a long night and call it love. Hospice at home felt both like surrender and like a battle fought on our terms. Ellen chose her chair by the window, the one that caught afternoon light, and on brave days, birds. On good mornings, she narrated the cakes she would make. When this was all a story, we told lemon with blackberry buttercream, chocolate with raspberry jam, vanilla with caramel that bites back. On bad afternoons, we counted tiles in the ceiling and pretended the number meant something other than endurance. Kim visited, but college had a way of pulling her into a current. I didn't blame her. I blamed clocks. She brought grand plans and expensive coffee and a reminder that the world outside still moved at its usual speed. Sometimes she was scared and dressed it as certainty. Sometimes she was tired and dressed it as impatience. We forgave each other by default and moved on because moving on was the only way through. The machine shop kept my spot, but I took fewer shifts. Overtime shrank to make room for oxygen tanks and medication alarms. The 401k became a tool instead of a promise. I pulled from it once more, cursing the penalty and blessing the cash. Friends brought casseroles and foil pans with instructions written in Sharpie. I learned how long you can live on lasagna if you try. Ellen lost her hair and then found scarves that made her look like the heroine of a foreign film. She said she didn't miss the hair. She missed the time it took to wash it because the shower had been her thinking place. We talked about small things with big gravity, what to do with recipes written in her mother's handwriting, whether to keep the chipped mug that made coffee taste like memory, which neighbor would remember to water the hydrangea without being asked twice. When the end came, it came sideways. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but like a tide that refuses to argue anymore. Irene sat with us. I counted Ellen's breaths as if I could bargain with them. The last one was smaller than I expected, and then there wasn't another. The house did not collapse. The refrigerator still hummed. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked at the wrong thing. Grief is cruel that way. The world keeps behaving as if it did not hear the news. After the funeral, I discovered the different flavors of quiet. Morning quiet that feels like permission. Afternoon quiet that feels like a dare. Midnight quiet that feels like a warning. I made lists and checked boxes because boxes don't ask how you're sleeping. The shop welcomed me back with the same shrug it gives to everyone who returns from any battle. Machines are egalitarian that way. They demand attention and pay you in predictability. Kim graduated into a job with a title that looked impressive on a business card and sounded even better when you said it into a phone. Her visits came wrapped in efficiency. She framed help as a solution to a problem I wasn't sure I had. Home care, 3 days a week, she said, handing me a brochure. Meal prep services, fall risk assessment. She liked sentences that ended in periods, not question marks. Then Anna arrived and rewired the house with laughter. She is a child who believes in rules when they're useful and in loopholes when they're funny. She calls me Grandpa with the kind of confidence that makes the title feel like a promotion. Saturday mornings became our treaty pancakes, one extra crispy for her. Cartoons, a walk to the park, a story about Grandma that she pretends she hasn't heard, and then corrects me on the details she likes best. With Anna, the house sounded right again. We made paper crowns and declared the living room a kingdom. We planted cherry tomatoes in a bucket, and she learned that patience tastes like sunshine. She asked why the spare bedroom still had Ellen's scarf on the hook, and I told her some things are both souvenirs and anchors. Kim softened in those early years of motherhood, and then hardened again under the weight of calendars. She worried about me in bullet points. Stove off. Doors locked, meds taken. She sent links about medical alert bracelets and community programs. I appreciated the intention and resented the implication, which is a sentence older men should probably have tattooed on our hands so we can point to it instead of arguing. There were incidents, the kind people use later as proof that they were right all along. I set water to boil and walked out to the mailbox and talked for too long with a neighbor about the price of lumber. The kettle screamed longer than kettles should. I put my keys in the refrigerator because the milk needed company. I stood in the backyard one night and spoke to Ellen like the air could carry a reply. Kim found out about one, then another, and the bullet points got bolder. When she first said assisted living, she said it like a neutral noun, a geography word, a place. Later it grew sharp. "You can't keep doing this," she said after the kettle incident, her voice flat with fatigue. "It's not safe." I told her safety and living sometimes quarrel. She told me liability and love sometimes rhyme. We were both more right than we wanted to admit and more wrong than we could afford to be. I began a binder because paper keeps secrets better than people. I wrote down account numbers and passwords and the name of the neighbor who always brings the trash cans to the curb because he's up before the sun and likes the exercise. I added a page titled "For When I Forget" and wrote things I was not ready to say out loud. Where the will was what songs I wanted on the day the house felt too full of memory to hold us, what promises I still intended to keep, even if my hands shook. Irene once told me there comes a time in every family where love has to prove it can do more than organize. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Love can schedule rides and label pillboxes, but it also has to sit in the mess and refuse to rename it tidy. As the years tilted forward, Kim's help began to sound like instructions rather than invitations. She meant well, I know she did, but worry is a poor translator. It turns "I love you" into "sign here." When she started keeping a folder in her purse, I felt it like a draft under a door you can't quite seal. Then came the birthday invitation with a font that tried too hard and a request to arrive early so we can go over a few things. I went anyway because fathers go. I brought the shoebox of cards because memory has a way of testifying when the living forget how. The house that night smelled like buttercream, and something metallic underneath anticipation sharpened into an edge. I told myself it was a party. I told myself the envelope in the neatly wrapped box would be a letter from a travel company or a gift certificate to the diner where they still know how to burn toast correctly. I told myself a lot of things that were almost true if you didn't stare at them too long. You know the rest, or at least the beginning of it. The candles, the applause, the lid coming off in my hands like a trap that had been patient. The way the room leaned forward, as if the future had taken a seat at the table and asked for silence. Backstory is supposed to explain a person to make their choices look inevitable. I don't believe in inevitable. I believe in habit and hope and the moment you refuse to be spoken for. Ellen taught me that structure comes first. The structure of my life has been simple work, love, show up, keep showing up. Decoration comes after. If there is decoration in what happens next, let it be dignity. I do not know if I am the hero of this story or its most stubborn extra. I do know this: whatever gift waits inside an envelope, a man is allowed to unwrap it and say, "No, not today, not like this." The next evening, the house still smelled faintly of frosting that nobody wanted to eat. The cake had been shoved into the refrigerator. Its candles wilted like tired sentries. I sat in the same chair, the same table, as if the party hadn't ended, but the silence said it had. Kim arrived first, early folder tucked under her arm like a weapon she had polished. Mark followed, smoothing his tie as though this were an interview. Relatives drifted back, neighbors too. The spectacle had grown legs overnight. What had begun as a birthday party had become a hearing, and I was the defendant. Kim didn't wait for pleasantries. "Dad," she said firmly, "we can't stall anymore. This is the draft power of attorney. This is the admission form. Sunrise Ridge is expecting you at 9 a.m. tomorrow. We just need your signature tonight." She laid the folder on the table. Paper bristled like knives. I looked down at it but didn't reach. "You've turned my birthday into a deadline." "It's not a deadline," she said quickly. "It's a lifeline." Mark nodded. "We've already spoken to the director. He has a room ready, private, with a window view. 24-hour medical staff, physical therapy, even a library." Frank, sitting stiff in the corner, growled, "Sounds like you've memorized the brochure." Kim ignored him. Her eyes were locked on me, pleading but also commanding. "Dad, this isn't about cruelty. It's about safety, liability. You can't keep living alone. One fall, one mistake, and we all pay the price." The word hung heavy again: liability. "Do you hear yourself?" Frank barked. "He's not a lawsuit. He's your father." Murmurs swept the room. Some nodded, with Kim muttering about accidents, insurance, hospital bills. Others shook their heads, appalled at the coldness. The room split in half, and I was the line down the middle. Anna burst in from the hallway, clutching the shoebox of birthday cards I'd kept. "He doesn't need to go anywhere," she shouted, setting the box on the table. "Grandpa is fine. He remembers stories about Grandma. He makes pancakes every Saturday. He teaches me math. He doesn't forget the things that matter." Her small hands trembled, but her voice carried louder than all the adults. The crowd gasped softly. A neighbor dabbed at her eyes. Kim crouched to meet Anna's gaze. "Sweetheart, you don't understand. He needs help." "No," Anna said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You don't understand. He's family." The word rang like a gavel. I pulled Anna close, kissing her hair. "Thank you, darling." Kim straightened, flustered, her tone sharpening. "Dad, you can't let a child dictate this. We are your family too. We're trying to protect you from yourself." "Protect me," I said slowly, by locking me away. Mark spread his hands as if to reason. "Think of it as retirement with support. Isn't that better than risking another accident insurance companies won't forgive forever? Neither will the courts." "That's what this is really about, isn't it?" I said. "Not my life, not my dignity, your fear of bills." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kim slammed her hand on the folder. "You're twisting this. I'm not greedy, I'm responsible. If something happened in that old house, the liability would destroy us. You could lose everything." Frank leaned forward, his voice a blade. "He already did. He lost Ellen, and now you want to take the rest." The words sliced the air. Silence swallowed the room. Kim's face flushed scarlet. "That's cruel, Frank. I loved Mom too." "Then act like it," he snapped. Tension thickened until even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Kim shoved the folder toward me, papers sliding like threats. "Dad, you will sign this tonight. Tomorrow morning you're going to Sunrise Ridge. Enough pretending." The crowd bristled. Some guests looked away ashamed. Others leaned forward, hungry for resolution. I stared at the folder, then at Kim. My heart ached, but my voice came steady. "You've just given me," I said loud enough for everyone to hear, "the cruelest birthday gift a father could ever receive." Gasps erupted, whispers buzzing like hornets. Kim froze, papers clutched in her trembling hand. I stood, Anna's hand clutching mine, and walked slowly toward the door. The crowd parted like waves, whispers trailing in my wake. I didn't slam the door when I left. I closed it gently, letting the silence finish what words could not. The hallway outside felt cooler than the living room, but the noise chased me even there. Voices clashing, footsteps scraping, the brittle sound of family unraveling. I paused only long enough to steady Anna's grip on my hand. Her small fingers were warm, trembling with the weight of something she shouldn't have to carry. "Grandpa," she whispered, "don't let them take you." "I won't," I said softly, "not like this." Frank followed close behind, muttering curses meant for himself, for Kim, for the whole damn circus. "I knew she was ambitious," he said under his breath, "but I didn't know she was heartless." Back in the living room, Kim's voice rose above the din. "He's not thinking clearly. Can't you all see that?" A neighbor shot back. "He's clearer than you. At least he remembers love." The argument splintered in every direction. Some defended me, some defended her, and some just wanted to be on the side that wouldn't make them uncomfortable later. I turned back slowly, deliberately, and stepped into the room again. The crowd quieted, half from curiosity, half from the weight of my silence. "I will not sign tonight," I said. Kim's face crumpled, then hardened. "You don't have a choice. Without help, you're a danger to yourself." I raised my chin. Danger is living without dignity. I would rather risk a fall in my own kitchen than spend 1,000 safe days in a place that feels like a waiting room for the end. Whispers stirred again. Some nodded, others shook their heads. Mark tried to mediate, his tone oily. "Dad, listen. This isn't prison. Sunrise Ridge has gardens, activities, even weekly trips. It's not abandonment, it's community." "Community!" Frank spat, "paid for by his savings. Don't dress theft in flowers." Kim snapped. "That's not what this is." She turned to the room, her voice breaking. "Don't you all understand? I'm the one who gets the calls when something goes wrong. I'm the one the hospital bills chase. I'm the one who lies awake at night waiting for a knock on the door. I'm exhausted. I can't do it anymore." Her words quivered on the edge of truth, and for a moment pity softened the room. Exhaustion is a language everyone understands. But pity doesn't erase betrayal. Anna tugged my hand again, defiant. "If you're tired, then I'll help. I'm little, but I can help Grandpa. I don't need sleep as much as you do." The crowd laughed nervously, a fragile sound. Kim's eyes glossed, but she shook her head. "Sweetheart, love isn't enough. Care takes more than stories and pancakes." Frank cut in with steel. "And money isn't enough either. Care takes heart. Where's yours, Kim?" She flinched, but recovered quickly. "My heart is here, trying to do the right thing. Dad just can't see it yet." I drew in a long breath and stepped closer to the table where the folder still sat. My voice steadied into something final. "You call this care. I call it surrender. You want me to sign away my life so you can sleep easier at night. That's not love. That's paperwork disguised as love." The room froze. Kim's tears fell unacknowledged. She pushed the folder again toward me. Please, Dad, tomorrow morning the van will be here. You can fight me all you want tonight, but you're going. I won't let you destroy yourself and us with stubborn pride. I met her eyes steady. Then tomorrow morning you'll see just how stubborn pride can be. The silence afterward was louder than any scream. Guests shifted uneasily. The candles had burned down to wax puddles, but their smoke still lingered acrid and heavy. Frank finally stood towering over the table. Enough. This isn't protection. It's betrayal. And if you can't see that, Kim, then maybe you're the one who needs help. A neighbor clapped once sharply, then stopped embarrassed, but the sound hung in the air like judgment. Kim pressed her palms against the folder, whispering fiercely, "I will not let him ruin everything." I turned to Anna and Frank, and together we walked toward the front door again. I did not look back this time. By the time I reached the door, the voices had tangled into chaos again, Kim pleading Mark, justifying guests, whispering their verdicts like jurors who couldn't wait to leave the courthouse. The smell of frosting and wax had soured into something bitter, like a party left out too long. I turned once more because sometimes dignity requires eye contact. I faced them all, the cousins, the neighbors, the so-called well-wishers. "You came for a celebration," I said evenly. "But what you've witnessed is a sentencing." The room stilled. Kim's hands trembled as she clutched the folder to her chest. "Dad, stop making this theatrical. You're not being sentenced, you're being saved." Saved from what I asked. From the house I built with my hands, from the garden Ellen planted, from the memories that raised me when my body grew tired. That's not salvation, that's exile. A ripple ran through the crowd. Some averted their eyes, others nodded slowly. Mark tried again, his words polished like a sales pitch. "You're romanticizing struggle. Assisted living doesn't erase your past, it preserves your future. Isn't a safe tomorrow worth more than a dangerous yesterday?" Frank barked a laugh that carried no humor. "He's not a spreadsheet, Mark. He's a man. You don't preserve a man by boxing him up." Kim's patience snapped. She slapped the folder onto the table papers, fanning out like a broken deck of cards. "Enough. If you love us, Dad, sign it. Show us you care about our lives, too." Her words cracked like a whip, sharp enough to sting. But they also exposed the truth. It wasn't just about my safety. It was about their convenience, their fear of liability, their hunger for control. Anna darted forward before I could stop her. She grabbed one of the loose pages and tore it in half, her small fists shaking. "He doesn't belong in a nursing home. He belongs with me." Gasps filled the room. Kim lunged forward, ripping the paper from Anna's hands. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare!" I thundered, stepping between them. The room jolted at the force in my voice. "You use paperwork as a weapon, but she uses love. Tell me which of us is really thinking clearly." Kim froze, her eyes wet, her chest heaving. She looked less like a daughter and more like a cornered prosecutor. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the refrigerator's hum seemed to fade. I took Anna's hand again and drew her close. "This ends tonight," I said quietly. "No signatures, no surrender." Kim's lips trembled, her words coming out broken. "You'll regret this, Dad. You'll fall, you'll forget, and then it'll be too late. And when it is, don't expect me to pick up the pieces." Her cruelty landed heavier than any threat, but in that moment it clarified everything. There was no misunderstanding, no miscommunication, just choice. And mine was made. I looked at the crowd, family, neighbors, strangers who had come to eat cake and stayed to watch a war. "Remember this night," I said. "Remember who loved and who counted costs, because someday you'll tell this story and you'll have to choose which part you played." Then I opened the door, the night air rushing in like a verdict. Anna clung to me, Frank at my shoulder, and together we walked into the dark. Behind us, the living room erupted, voices, colliding chairs, scraping, the sound of a family splintering in public. But I didn't turn back. Some wars aren't worth watching once you've already won the first battle by refusing to yield. The papers remained scattered on the table, witnesses to a night that began with candles and ended with fire. The house was silent when I returned, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of walls that had overheard too much. The refrigerator hummed, the furnace sighed. Outside, a dog barked at a passing car. Life continued oblivious to the storm that had torn through my birthday. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one that had held Cakesbill's homework, and now betrayal. The shoebox of cards Anna had rescued sat beside me, its lid askew, one corner bent. I lifted it, shuffled through paper scrawled with crayons and love, and felt the weight of what I still carried. Ellen's handwriting surfaced from the past in an old card, her looping script declaring, "Happy birthday to the man who keeps us steady." I traced the letters with my finger, as though they were braille, as though I could feel her voice. She had believed in me even when I doubted myself. She had believed I was enough. Now my daughter wanted signatures, not stories, liability, not love. I pressed my palms against my eyes, the memory of Ellen's last days flooding back. The hospice nurse had once warned me, when illness comes, families fracture. Some fight together, some fight each other. I had thought we would be the first kind. I'd been wrong. I whispered into the quiet. Am I truly a burden now? The chair across from me sat empty. But I could almost see Ellen there, chin propped on her hand, smiling gently the way she used to when I asked foolish questions. I wanted her to answer. I wanted her to say, "No, you are not a burden. You are still the man who held this family together. But ghosts don't speak. They only remind." I thought of Kim, her eyes wet, her voice sharp, her insistence relentless. I could not decide if it was greed or fear that drove her. Maybe both, maybe neither. Exhaustion perhaps polished into cruelty. She had once clapped her hands at carousel cakes. She had once drawn hearts on Father's Day cards. How does a child travel from that to this? The word guardianship echoed in my mind. I had read enough stories, heard enough rumors, children taking parents to court, judges declaring elders incompetent lives, signed away with a gavel. Could Kim try the same? Could she strip me of my rights in the name of protection? The thought chilled me deeper than any winter draft. I rose and went to the cabinet above the fridge where Ellen used to keep recipes. Behind a row of cookbooks lay the binder I had begun after her death. I pulled it down heavy with plastic sleeves, tabs labeled in my careful handwriting. Bank accounts, insurance, trust draft, for when I forget. I opened it and leafed through pages of passwords, account numbers, copies of documents. I wasn't ready to sign, but wasn't ready to destroy either. Paper doesn't betray. Paper remembers exactly what you write. I added a new page. At the top, I wrote for when they try to take me. Beneath it, I listed the lawyer's number, the steps to revoke a draft POA. The details of the trust I had only half formed in thought, but now would finish. I underlined the word finish. Anna's laughter echoed faintly from memory, the way she had stood against her mother, small and fierce, declaring, "He's family." A child's voice, but it had carried more truth than all the adults combined. I looked at the clock. Midnight. The house creaked like old bones, reminding me of my own. But I felt something steady in me that hadn't been there hours ago. I was not beaten. I was not broken. I whispered again, but this time not as a question. I'm not a burden. The binder lay open before me like a map. Tomorrow I would call Ms. Patel. Tomorrow I would set into motion protections that could not be undone by guilt or greed. Tomorrow I would show Kim that dignity was not optional, not negotiable, not for sale. Ellen's photo on the wall caught the dim kitchen light. She smiled, that quiet, knowing smile, the one that always seemed to say, "You already know the answer." No. And for the first time that night, I believed I did. Morning came with the low growl of a van engine outside. Through the blinds, I saw it, white with the logo of Sunrise Ridge painted across its side in cheerful colors that felt like mockery. The driver leaned on the horn, once twice impatient. The neighbors were already gathering, drawn by curiosity and rumor. Kim stood on the porch, folder in hand, her coat sharp, her face sharper. Mark hovered beside her tie, knotted tight, rehearsed, calm, masking nerves. They looked like people waiting for a deal to close. I opened the front door slowly, Anna and Frank at my side. Gasps rose from the small crowd as I stepped into the morning light, not hunched, not defeated, but steady. "Dad." Kim called, relief and triumph tangled in her tone. "It's time." She lifted the folder as though presenting evidence. "The van is ready. Just sign and everything will be handled." The driver swung the van door open, metal clanging. A stretcher gleamed inside. The sight sent a murmur through the crowd, half pity, half anticipation. I lifted my hand. There will be no stretcher today. Whispers rippled. Kim forced a smile, strained at the edges. "Dad, please, don't make a scene. We agreed." "No," I interrupted, voice firm. "You agreed. You decided. Without me." Mark stepped forward, palms raised. "Sir, the admission is standard. Safety protocols, liability coverage, 24-hour staff. You'll have everything you need." I met his gaze, everything but freedom. The driver shifted awkwardly, glancing at the crowd. "Look, I just do transport. Paper says pick up, I pick up." Before Kim could press further, a calm voice cut through the air. "That paper means nothing." The crowd turned. Ms. Patel stepped forward, briefcase in hand, her posture composed, her tone unwavering. The lawyer's presence carried its own authority, quiet but unshakable. She faced the driver first. "Without a signed and notarized power of attorney, you have no authority to remove this man. If you attempt to, it constitutes unlawful restraint. The driver hesitated, then shut the van door with a thud. Ms. Patel turned to Kim and Mark. Your draft POA is invalid. Your admission form is unenforceable. He is competent as confirmed by medical documentation I carry here. She tapped the briefcase. Any attempt to force him will invite legal consequences. The neighbors murmured louder now, their whispers leaning toward outrage. Someone hissed. They tried to trick him. Kim's face drained of color, but she rallied. This isn't about legality. It's about care. He's not safe alone. Safety does not override rights, Ms. Patel replied evenly. You cannot strip autonomy in the name of convenience. I stepped forward then, binder in hand. Last night I made preparations. I revoked every draft document you thought would hold me hostage, and I finished what I began years ago. I opened the binder and pulled out a folder thicker than Kim's, its pages crisp with new signatures. I held it up so the crowd could see. This is the Ellen Grace Fund. A trust established in my wife's name, already filed, already in effect. My house, my savings, everything of worth has been placed within it. Gasps, phones lifted to capture the moment. Kim staggered a step. You can't just give it all away. I didn't give it away, I said. I gave it purpose. Hospice care scholarships, community programs, things Ellen would have wanted. Things she still deserves through me. Mark tried to interrupt. This doesn't make sense financially. I cut him off. It makes sense morally. And it makes sense legally. Ms. Patel has ensured every page holds. Ms. Patel nodded firm. The documents are binding. There is no loophole for you to exploit. The crowd shifted, the tide turning. Where once there had been pity, now there was admiration and anger toward Kim. Frank finally stepped forward, his voice rising above the murmurs. So that's what this was about all along. Not his health, his money, his house, his legacy. You tried to sign him away like a check you couldn't wait to cash. Applause broke out. Tentative at first, then growing. Not everyone clapped, but enough to shift the air. Kim flinched at the sound, her cheeks flaming. I closed the binder gently. You thought you would deliver me to Sunrise Ridge this morning. Instead, I deliver you the truth. I am not yours to sign away. Not now, not ever. Kim's hands shook as she clutched her folder like it was armor that had already been pierced. The applause still echoed faintly, a sound she couldn't silence no matter how tightly she pressed her lips together. This isn't fair, she cried out, her voice cracking. I was trying to protect you, to protect all of us, and you humiliated me in front of everyone. Her words hung sharp in the morning air. The crowd leaned closer, caught between sympathy and condemnation. You didn't protect me, I said calmly, though my chest ached. You tried to cage me. There's a difference. Mark stepped forward, desperate to salvage something. Look, emotions are high right now, but legally binding or not, this doesn't solve the practical problem. He's alone in that house. He forgets things. He leaves ovens on. What then? Who cleans up the damage when something goes wrong? I lifted the binder higher. I prepared for that too. A homemade will visit weekly, covered by the trust. The fund is structured to handle emergencies. You see liability, I see solutions. The difference is, my solutions don't strip away dignity. A murmur of approval rolled through the onlookers. Kim's face twisted, the fragile line between daughter and adversary breaking. You always loved her more than me, she spat suddenly. Ellen's name on everything, her fund, her memory. I'm invisible next to her. I always was. The words stunned the crowd. Even Frank looked momentarily taken aback. Kim, I whispered, sorrow sinking deep. This isn't about who I loved more. It's about who taught me what love means. Your mother gave without demand. You demand without giving. That's the difference. The crowd buzzed, some gasping at the harsh truth, others nodding. Anna tugged at my sleeve, her voice small but fierce. Grandma told me once that love is like planting flowers. You water them, not choke them. Grandpa watered us. You're choking him. The child's words struck harder than any legal argument. Even the neighbors blinked back tears. Kim faltered, her composure shattering. She turned wildly to the guests. You all think I'm greedy? You think I don't care? But who's the one who got the midnight calls? Who's the one who had to leave work when he forgot his meds? Who's the one who— Frank cut her off with a voice like thunder. And who's the one who tried to fix it with signatures instead of love? The applause came again, stronger this time. Kim clutched the folder so tight the papers bent. You've all chosen sides, she hissed. But when he falls, when he breaks, don't come crying to me. I won't be there. I'm done. Her words were meant as defiance, but they sounded more like defeat. I stepped closer, closing the gap between us. For a heartbeat, I saw the little girl she used to be, the child with frosting on her face, clapping at a spinning carousel cake. My voice softened. Kim, you could still choose love, even now. She turned away, her shoulders stiff. Love doesn't pay bills, Frank muttered. Neither does betrayal. The neighbors murmured louder, the tide fully against her now. Phones captured every second, lenses pointed like witnesses who would not forget. Ms. Patel cleared her throat, professional as ever. The matter is settled. His trust stands. His autonomy is secure. If you contest, it will be in court and you will lose. Kim's knees buckled, and for a moment Mark caught her elbow, but even he looked shaken, the weight of public shame pressing too heavy. I turned back to the crowd. You came to watch me leave my home. Instead, you saw me reclaim it. Let this be a reminder. Dignity is not negotiable, not for me, not for anyone. The applause swelled again, joined now by cheers. Not universal, never universal, but enough to draw a line in the morning air. The van driver, clearly unsettled, muttered, "Guess I'm not needed," and climbed back into his seat. The van pulled away, its bright logo shrinking into the distance, leaving only the echo of an attempt that had failed. For the first time in years, I felt taller than my years, not because I had won, but because I had refused to surrender. The crowd began to disperse slowly, murmurs trailing like smoke. Some shook my hand as they left, whispering, "Good for you," or "Stay strong." Others avoided my gaze, unwilling to pick sides too openly. But the shift was undeniable. The weight of the room no longer leaned toward Kim. Frank remained at my side, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "They won't forget this," he said quietly. "Neither will she." I nodded, my gaze fixed on Kim. She stood rigid in the middle of the porch, folder clutched to her chest like the last remnant of control. Mark hovered near, his hand on her shoulder, whispering words that fell uselessly. Her face was pale, her jaw tight, but her eyes betrayed the storm inside: anger, humiliation, fear. "Kim," I said, voice steady but not cruel, "I don't hate you, I don't even wish you harm. But you need to understand what you tried to do was not protection. It was theft. Theft of dignity, theft of choice, theft of the years I still have left." She flinched as if struck, then snapped. "And what about me, about us? You think your dignity keeps me safe from lawsuits, from bills, from nights spent waiting for the phone to ring? I've been carrying your risks like stones in my pockets." Her words broke on the edge of truth, but truth twisted is still a weapon. I stepped closer, binder in hand. "I never asked you to carry me. I asked you to walk with me. You chose to drag me instead." The audience that remained gasped softly. Kim's tears finally spilled. "You'll see. One day when you fall, when you forget, when you're alone, you'll wish you had signed." Frank exploded, his voice like gravel breaking stone. "And when that day comes, Kim will lift him, not you, because love doesn't come with a contract." The words hit harder than any legal document. The neighbors nodded, whispers of agreement swelling into something close to applause. I raised the binder again for all to see. This is not just paper. This is my voice preserved in ink. My trust ensures that when I falter, care will come, not because I was forced, but because I prepared. Ellen taught me that structure comes first, then decoration. This trust is the structure. Love, dignity, choice. Those are the decoration. That is how I choose to live. Ms. Patel stepped forward, adding the weight of law to my words. "Everything filed is valid. No power of attorney exists. The trust protects him fully. Any challenge will fail in court. This matter is closed." Kim's shoulders sagged, her fight slipping away. Mark whispered urgently, "We should go." She resisted for a heartbeat, then turned sharply, striding down the porch steps. The folder, once her shield, slipped from her hands and fell open on the ground, papers scattered, fluttering like defeated flags. Anna bent to pick one up, but I shook my head. "Leave them. They no longer matter." Kim paused at the sidewalk, her back to me, then hurled her last words over her shoulder. "You've ruined everything. Don't expect me to forgive you." I watched her walk away, Mark trailing close. My heart ached, but my spine held. Frank exhaled heavily. "She'll lick her wounds, but she'll remember today. Everyone will." The neighbors lingered, their faces softer now. One woman said gently, "You did the right thing. Don't doubt it." Another man added, "You gave all of us something to think about. Too many of us stay silent." I nodded, though my chest felt heavy. Rightness doesn't erase sorrow. Anna tugged my sleeve. "Grandpa, are we safe now?" I knelt to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're safer than yesterday," I said, "and tomorrow will be stronger still." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that holds both relief and lingering fear. As the crowd dispersed, I looked toward Ellen's garden, where the morning light caught on leaves she once planted. For a moment I imagined her standing there, apron dusted with flour, nodding quietly. And I knew this battle wasn't just one for me. It was one for her, for Anna, for the promise that love cannot be signed away. The porch felt strangely quiet once Kim and Mark disappeared down the street, their footsteps swallowed by distance. The crowd thinned further, but the residue of judgment lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Some neighbors still hovered at the edge of the yard, whispering, their faces caught between pity for Kim and admiration for me. I closed the binder and held it against my chest, not like a trophy, but like a shield. Frank clapped a hand on my shoulder, heavy but warm. "You stood taller today than I've ever seen you," he said. His voice cracked just enough to betray the years we both carried. I looked at Anna, still clutching my sleeve, her eyes wide. "You were brave too," I told her, "braver than anyone in that room." She smiled a tired smile, but her chin lifted proudly. Grandma would be proud. The words pierced deeper than any accusation Kim had thrown. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my throat thick with unshed tears. We stepped back into the house. The birthday cake still sat on the table, sagging candles melted into colorful stubs. The once celebratory frosting looked grotesque now, like a smile stretched too wide. I took the knife, cut a small piece, and set it on a plate. Anna ate quietly, every bite reclaiming the celebration Kim had tried to turn into a contract signing. Frank poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. "You know she won't let this go, right?" "I know," I said, "but she'll have to fight the law, not me, and she'll lose." Ms. Patel had stayed behind her briefcase, still at her side. "Your preparations were solid. Revocation, trust, medical confirmation, all airtight. If Kim contests, the court will see it for what it is." "And what is that?" Frank asked. "Greed masked as concern," she replied bluntly. I exhaled relief mixed with sorrow. I wanted to believe it was fear or exhaustion, but maybe you're right. Ms. Patel softened her tone. People act out of both. Fear twists into control. Exhaustion grows into resentment. It doesn't excuse her, but it explains her. The explanation did little to ease the ache. That evening, word of the morning's confrontation had already spread. A cousin called, hesitant but supportive. "Uncle, I heard what happened." "You did the right thing." A neighbor dropped off soup, muttering, "That girl of yours, she forgot what family means." I thanked them, though gratitude felt hollow. What I wanted was Kim, the daughter who once spun circles around a carousel cake, clapping until her palms reddened. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who measured love in liability clauses. When the house grew quiet again, I opened the binder once more. I reread the clauses of the Ellen Grace Fund hospice donations, scholarships for single parents, library support. Ellen's name on each page glowed like a lantern in the dark. Anna curled beside me on the couch, her head against my arm. "Grandpa, are you really giving everything away?" she asked. "Not everything," I whispered. "The most important thing I still keep." "What's that?" I kissed the top of her head. "You." Her giggle broke through the heaviness. "That's better than money." "Yes," I said, smiling faintly. "It is." Frank chuckled from the armchair. "Kid's smarter than most adults I know." Night settled in, and though my body ached, my spirit held steady. For the first time in years, I felt as though Ellen's voice hadn't faded but had become louder, guiding me through ink and paper, through truth, spoken in front of neighbors and strangers alike. When I finally lay down to sleep, I whispered into the quiet, "We won today, Ellen. Not with fists, not with fury, but with dignity." And in the hush that followed, I almost heard her answer. The next morning, the world felt different. The air outside was crisp, the kind that clears your lungs and reminds you you're still alive. I brewed a pot of coffee, the scent filling the kitchen like an old friend. As it percolated, I opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The neighborhood looked almost ordinary again. Kids rode bicycles down the street. A mailman carried envelopes like nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet I knew, and they knew, that yesterday had been a fracture line. The story of the cruel birthday gift had already spread further than the party's guest list. Frank joined me, sipping from a chipped mug. "Some folks are still buzzing," he said. "They're calling it the day the old man refused to sign his life away." He grinned. "Has a nice ring to it." I chuckled, shaking my head. "I didn't do it for a story." "No," he agreed. "That's why it's worth telling." Anna bounded onto this porch, still in pajamas, hair a mess. She carried one of Ellen's scarves wrapped around her shoulders like a cape. "Grandpa, can we make pancakes today?" "Just us." "Always," I said, smiling. As the griddle heated, I flipped through the binder once more. Each page reassured me the trust was solid, the fund irrevocable, Anna's future secure. Even if Kim tried again, even if her anger boiled into another plan, the foundation was laid too firmly to be shaken. The phone rang mid-morning. It was Kim. Her voice was tight, brittle. "You embarrassed me. You destroyed any chance we had of working together." I held the phone steady. I destroyed nothing. I protected what was mine to protect. You still have a chance to choose love, Kim, but that's your choice, not mine. There was silence, then a sharp breath. I won't forget this. I hope you don't, I said. Because I never will. I hung up gently. Sorrow heavy but not overwhelming. Some wounds would take longer to heal than others if they ever healed at all. By noon, Frank left with a promise to stop by later. Anna and I sat at the table, a plate of pancakes between us. She stacked hers high, drowned them in syrup, and grinned. Grandma would like this breakfast. Yes, I said softly, she would. When Anna left for the park, I brewed a second cup of coffee and carried it to the porch. I sat alone watching the sunlight catch in Ellen's garden. The hydrangeas had bloomed stubborn and bright. I raised the mug slightly as though toasting her memory. I kept my promise, I whispered. They tried to take everything, but I kept us whole. For you, for Anna, for what love is supposed to mean. In that moment, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel frail. I felt like a man who had drawn a line and held it. And though the road ahead would not be simple, though Kim's bitterness might harden, though loneliness would still gnaw in quiet hours, I knew I had chosen the only path that left dignity intact. The cruel birthday gift had become something else, a testament, a warning, a story to be told and retold, not just about me, but about every parent, every elder who deserves more than signatures and liability clauses. As the sun climbed higher, I let the warmth soak into my bones. Tomorrow would come, and with it new battles, new decisions. But for today, I was at peace. What would you do if this happened in your family? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and most importantly, take care of yourself. Drink some water. Hold your loved ones close, and remember, dignity is worth defending. Thank you for watching.